Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call the State Board meeting to order. Ms. Van Pell, would you please call the roll?
Board Member Durham.
Here.
Board Member Flores.
Here.
Board Member Goff.
Here.
Board Member McClellan.
Here.
Board Member Rankin.
Here.
Board Member Sheppel.
Here.
Board Member Schroeder.
Here. Thank you. Board Member Flores, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The next item is approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion, please? Board Member McClellan.
I move to approve the agenda as published.
Thank you. That's a proper motion. Do I have a second? Second. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. That motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Next item is the consent agenda. Board Member Durham, would you be kind enough to make the motion for the agenda?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move to place the following items on the consent agenda. 17.04, approve Southeastern BOCES request for reauthorization as a designated agency as set forth in the published agenda. Item 17.07, regarding disciplinary proceedings concerning license charge number 2014C PPM 1803, directing the chair of the State Board of Education to sign the summary suspension order concerning the credential. Item 17.08, regarding disciplinary proceedings concerning credential charge number 2015J MAM 1672, direct the chair of the State Board of Education to sign the stipulation and final agency order concerning the revocation of the credential holder's substitute authorization. Item 17.09, regarding disciplinary proceedings concerning license charge number 2017CP JF 1206, direct the chair of the State Board of Education to sign the stipulation and final agency order concerning the professional teacher license. Item 17.11, approve the initial emergency authorization requests as set forth in the published agenda. Item 17.12, approve the 4 emergency authorization renewal request as set forth in the published agenda. That's the end of the consent agenda.
Thank you. That's a proper motion. Do I have a second, please?
Second.
Thank you, Board Member Flores. Are there any items that anyone wishes to have pulled from the agenda? Great. Are all in favor of the consent agenda?
Aye.
Thank you. Passes. All right, the next item is a report from Carmen Van Pelt, a paralegal from the AG's office, who has been very generous with her time to help us in the absence of our normal Director of Board Relations. Ms. Van Pelt, thank you. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members
And
of
Ms.
the
Van
board.
Pelt,
Yeah.
our microphones are very sensitive, so you gotta get real close.
Sorry
Read
about
it.
that.
No, thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board, and Commissioner Anthus. In keeping tradition alive, I'd like to give a friendly reminder to please speak directly into your microphones.
You were modeling it. You were modeling how you do it.
For those of you needing to connect to CDE's guest wireless, locate CDE hotspot, and the new password is banana with a capital B.
Oh,
In your board packets, you have the following: a quick glance expense report and an events calendar. There are a number of events coming up in the months of February and March that I'd like to remind you of. Interviews for the position of the Director of State Board Relations will be held on February 15th. As a reminder, these interviews will be held in executive session, and therefore the meeting will be closed to the public. CDE will be closed on Monday, February 18th, in observance of President's Day. The CASB Winter Legislative Conference is February 28th through March 1st. Also on March 1st, the board will hear presentations regarding the Adams 14 EMO selection process, have a legislative update meeting, along with the rescheduled accountability work session meeting. In your board packets or available on board docs are the following for materials. For today, Wednesday, February 13th, for 8.01, there is a memo concerning the bills in today's legislative update, along with the bill text for HB 19-1134. 8.02 has a memo concerning the bills in today's legislative update, along with bill text for SB 19-069. 8.03 has a memo concerning the bills in today's legislative update, along with bill text for HB 19-1032. 9.01 has a memo concerning the certification of January to June 2019 state share entitlements and the accounting report for January 2019. 11.01 has a memo concerning the request for approval of the school transformation grant applicants, an accompanying PowerPoint and specific recommendations related to this request. 14.01 has a memo concerning the approval of early literacy grant recommendations, an accompanying PowerPoint, and a list of recommended grantees. 15.01 has a memo concerning the 2018 and 2019 Colorado Teachers of the Year. 17.01 has a memo concerning the notice of rulemaking for the rules of the Colorado Educator Licensing Act of 1991, 1 CCR 30137, an accompanying PowerPoint for all educator talent rule revisions presented this month, a red line and clean versions of the rules, and a crosswalk of rule to statute. 17.02 has a memo concerning the notice of rulemaking, the rules for the administration of educator licensure endorsements, CCR 301-101, an accompanying PowerPoint for all educator talent rule revisions presented this month, a red line and clean version of the rules, and a crosswalk of the rules to statute. 17.03 has a memo concerning the notice of rulemaking, rules for the administration of a statewide system to evaluate the effectiveness of licensed personnel employed by school districts and boards of cooperative services, 1 CCR 30187, an accompanying PowerPoint for all educator talent rule revisions presented this month, a red line and clean versions of the rules, and a crosswalk of rules to statute. 17.04 has a memo concerning Southeastern BOCES request for reauthorization as a designated agency. 17.05 has a memo concerning the University of Northern Colorado's request for reauthorization of its traditional licensure programs and an accompanying PowerPoint. 17.11 has a memo concerning a request for initial emergency authorizations. 17.12 has a memo concerning the request for emergency authorization renewal. 18.01 has a memo concerning the notice of rulemaking for the new rules of the review of early college designations, 1 CCR 301-105, clean version of the rules, and crosswalk of rule to statute. 19.01 has a memo concerning Pueblo City Schools accountability actions, a PowerPoint presentation from CDE staff, a PowerPoint presentation from Pueblo City Schools, an updated timeline from Pueblo City Schools, and an updated RFP for external management providers from Pueblo City Schools. For tomorrow, February 14th, there is, for 3.01, there's a memo concerning the Education Leadership Council and an accompanying PowerPoint and report. 4.01 has a memo concerning the State Board administrative procedures for considering early accountability actions and the draft procedures. 5.01 has a draft resolution supporting state land board efforts to improve financial outcomes for beneficiaries from school trust assets. 6.01 has a memo, presentation, and supporting document concerning changes to the rules for the administration of statewide accountability measures. 7.01 has a memo and application concerning Roaring Fork School District's request for exclusive chartering authority. 10.01 has documents related to the Ascent Classical Academy Flatirons versus Boulder Valley School District Charter School Appeal. Included is the notice of appeal and local board resolution, the record on appeal, the opening brief, the answer brief, and the reply brief. That's all I've got.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Ms. Van Bell? Next item is a report from our commissioner. Commissioner?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. Good to be with you. I wanted to start out by finding my report.
Did I?
Nope, I got
Go in
it.
your
Thank
space.
you. I did want to first thank you for your generosity in letting me not be at the January board meeting to be with my father for his Lifetime Achievement Award in Phoenix. And it was really, really important that I was there, and it was very touching. And he was very thankful that you all allowed that too. So thank you for that. So I just have a number of pieces to let you know. Mostly we have been spending our time getting to know all of the new folks over at the legislature. There are 30 new legislators. We have probably 40 new governor staff that we need to be working with, the governor himself. We also have about 20 new agency heads. And so it has actually just been quite time consuming, just sort of getting to know people and meeting people and learning new roles and helping them understand our role, and specifically the kind of different governance structure we have, that you all are politically elected and that we report to you all. So we've been doing a lot of work with them. Our relationship with the governor and the governor's staff is off to a good start. He was very thankful for the all-day kindergarten resolution that you did and has mentioned that to me several times. So that's good. And he has asked me to participate in his cabinet level meetings to keep involved and in the loop. So that's great. So appreciate the support there. Just my sort of normal course of meetings. Met with my superintendent rural council recently, and we talked a lot at that meeting about some of the accountability rules that will be coming up. They're keenly interested in those rules, and we got some feedback from them on that process. Continue to talk about some of the teacher shortage challenges that they face in particular areas in the rural communities. We had since I wasn't here in January, we had our final meeting of the Education Leadership Council where we approved the final report. And I will be giving, and hopefully Senator Rankin will be here as well if his schedule allows. We will be giving you a 30-minute briefing on that tomorrow morning. Also had the Colorado Association for School Executives the last couple days. Several of you were there. I have my Superintendent Advisory Council at that meeting as well. And again, the hot topic is the accountability rules and process there. So we spent some time discussing that process and how to continue to engage them. I did have a great visit to St. Vrain's Innovation Center, which I think is very aligned with some of the work we are trying to move forward here as a state in terms of really linking career tech ed, high-tech jobs, concurrent enrollment certificates that can be gathered in the high school setting. They have an amazing aeronautics program there, and some even a flight simulator, which was pretty cool. So a whole robotics effort, and the students are incredibly engaged, and it was a great visit. I was proud to be with several of you at our 30th year celebration of the Colorado Preschool Program, where we are seeing some really good results with our preschoolers that have been in that specific program. We've been able to track them over time to see that their graduation rates and their achievement rates are higher than like peers with similar risk factors. So we're really excited about the Colorado Preschool Program and the outcomes we're able to look at now. And then I also had my teacher cabinet. We meet quarterly. We did a visit to the Capitol where they got to participate in some panel discussions with legislators, and that was great. And again, hot topic was accountability. So we talked with our teacher cabinet about that. And then lastly, I do want to give a special shout out to Carol, who's not even here, because she's doing so many things. But we have missed Elizabeth Cordial moving on. We have missed her in more than one way because we loved working with her. But Carol has taken on, along with Ms. Van Pelt, a lot of extra work, as well as Ms. Pearson and myself. So just want to give us, but really Carol has taken on the brunt of 3 times the amount of emails that used to be siphoned off to Elizabeth, and so just wanted to give her a special shout out for that. And then as Ms. Van Pelt mentioned, we have been working diligently to present you with some final candidates for that role on Friday. And we'll talk more about that as well. But we wanted to move that process along as quickly as possible, so it's been our highest priority for a number of reasons. So with that, I'll conclude my report. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda are updates on the legislative matters. Ms. Mello, please join us and tell us what you have for us.
Good morning.
Hi.
How are you all? It's nice to see you.
Thank you.
I'm ready to
Welcome.
be done with all this really cold weather and slip sliding around on the streets. So I thought I would just start with a brief kind of general overview of where we are in the legislative session, and then there are 3 bills that your legislative contacts have brought to you today for consideration of a position. I think similar to what Dr. Anthus said in terms of getting to know a lot of new people and working with a lot of folks who are trying to figure out new situations. We're kind of experiencing that same thing at the Capitol as well. I've mentioned to you all before, we have a really large number of new legislators this year. The House Education Committee has a whole bunch of brand new people. I mean, it's majority first-year members. And so, they are learning their way through this, right? And learning how to get through things efficiently or not on occasion, more often not so far, but hopefully that will change a little bit. And, everyone is just really kind of getting settled in at this point. Even though we're a good portion into session, we're over 25% of the way done, for those of you who, like me, who keep track of such things. It just feels like we're starting to hit our stride now. And the committees are really working through, the bulk of legislation, lots of bills in committee every time they meet. The other thing I will just note is the reinstitution of the early morning joint Senate and House Education Committee meetings. They've been meeting Wednesday mornings at 7:30 regularly. Board Chair Schroeder gave a presentation last week on the role of the state board, which they asked for, and I think that was a really great sign that they were kind of seeking that information about the board and its role. Again, similar to what Dr. Anthus said, I'm spending a fair amount of time reminding people that the Department of Education does not report to the governor, and that, well, we certainly, seek to have good partnerships with everybody and all of the elected officials, that we have a unique structure. And I have a feeling I'm going to be saying that, keep saying that, and keep saying that, and keep saying that. So does anybody have any questions? So the 3 bills we're going to talk about, I know is in your agenda. One has to do with teacher induction programs. One has to do with dyslexia. The other is the comprehensive sex ed bill. Putting those aside just for the moment, are there other bills or pieces of legislation or topics you all are hearing about that you'd like me to talk a little bit more about first?
Board Member Sheffel?
I don't know the name of the bill, but the mental health bill, what is the number of that? For kids 12 to receive mental health
Yes.
services.
Madam Chair, Board
Yes.
Member Shuffle, I will look the number of that bill up as we speak. I'll try to talk and look.
Why don't I look it up for you?
Okay, that'd be great. There are several bills actually that are kind of related to mental health and mental health of children and our students. The one you're referring to has a couple of components, one of which would allow students 12 and older, children 12 and older, to I'm not saying this very well. Basically, their parents would not have to approve them getting mental health treatment. So, thank you. It's House Bill 1120. This is helpful. Maybe Alyssa can follow me around.
No.
No.
We can fight over her.
No.
Did you have other questions about that, Dr. Shuffle? I apologize. I'm not trying to be.
I just wondered where it is in the process.
Okay,
If you're gonna address that.
It is scheduled for its first committee hearing next week on Wednesday, February 20th. Thank you. And it's in the Public Health Committee. It's not in the Education Committee.
And are the terms of that getting health services through the school district or anywhere?
This is not a bill I'm a total expert on,
Okay.
I will admit.
It's not
I
your
believe
sandbox.
that it is, I'm just going to read this first line that describes it. The bill allows a minor 12 years of age or older to seek and obtain psychotherapy services with or without the consent of the minor's parent or guardian. So I think it would be inclusive of a school setting, but it's not only school settings. It could, that would apply in a private practice
Got it.
scenario as well.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Board Member Flores?
I'm concerned, I don't know the name of the bill, because it may not have a name yet, but it's about the READ Act, the one which Lundin and, I'm trying to think of his name, Bridges, Jeff Bridges is working on. Do you have any idea about that bill in dealing with a READ Act?
Madam Chair, Board Member Flores, I do know that those two senators are having conversations about some potential legislation around the READ Act. Has not been introduced yet. I actually spoke with Senator Ellen Dean last night and with Senator Bridges this morning. They are very much in the beginning stages. They're not, I wouldn't even say it's a guarantee that there's going to be a bill, and they're not at the point yet of, they're still trying to understand what they would like to be in the bill. The desire to do something comes out of the Joint Budget Committee hearings and briefings that we were part of in December, where the JBC analyst Craig Harper presented the committee with an evaluation of the READ Act and its impact or lack thereof, I think, in the way that he presented it, has had over the last 10 years. So I think that's what's motivating these conversations, but they're all still very nebulous at this point.
Right, and they did bring in the issue about the accountability changes that have been made on, we've had a lot of accountability changes, meaning testing changes all along that, and since then. And usually, it takes about 5 years once you get a new test in the system, and get the results of how and where they are. I'm talking about third graders, and so we just gave that test 2016, the new one, and so.
A couple of years prior to that, so.
Really? Well, we've had one, but then it changed, and so, I'm hoping that they have some information on metrics about how that works.
Okay.
you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Other questions about things you're hearing, rumors, fun stuff? No, there's not much fun stuff.
Rumor I
happening
heard is that
after
there were a lot of bills already compared to other years, that there's an early influx.
Madam Chair, I would say that there has been a greater fidelity to the deadlines than I have seen in past years. I don't have quite the history that your vice chair has, but
Damning with faint praise.
yeah, and I do think that there have been more bills coming out sooner. It certainly feels that way to me as your legislative liaison. I'm hopeful that what that means is that it's not that there's more bills in total, it's just that more of them were introduced earlier, but we shall see. It is very common for new legislative leadership to say we are going to crack down on late bills, and the current new legislative leadership has said that. Whether that happens or not, I think we'll see.
Yeah,
We'll
you'll see
know
the
if
count
that's
at-
if
you'll
that's
see
the
the count
case
at
in
the
May
end
or
of the
not.
session. Right.
All of the actual deadlines have passed, leadership has the ability to decide on, so a member can say, I know I missed the deadline, I'd like to run a bill on this topic, and leadership gets to say yes or no. So that's what we call getting late bill status. Anything that would come forward from this point on would be a late bill. My prediction is that they will say yes to more of those. They'll keep saying yes for maybe another month or so, and then they'll start saying no. For obvious reason, right? I mean, you get to 2 weeks left in session and you're trying to introduce bills, and it gets challenging to just move things through the process.
Yeah, but it happens.
Oh, it happens. You can introduce and pass a bill in 3 days. It's not easy, but it can be done.
So we will now consider the 3 House bills. House Bill 19-1134 concerning researching effective methods for assisting early grade students with dyslexia. Do I have a motion for this bill? Board Member Goff?
Sorry. I move to support House Bill 19-1134 concerning researching effective methods for assisting early grade students with dyslexia.
That's a proper motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Discussion? Do you want to give us a brief?
I'm happy to do
Please.
so. So we've been talking about this bill for a long time amongst ourselves. So hopefully nothing I'm about to say is, okay, sorry. That's just the motion up there. Hopefully nothing I'm about to say comes as a surprise to you. The legislation has been introduced. It is House Bill 1134. The sponsors in the House are Janet Buckner and Jim Wilson. The Senate sponsor is Nancy Todd. We did try to have a Republican co-sponsor in the Senate. We just ran out of time, honestly, before we had to turn the bill in. I always work to try to get bipartisan support for anything that we're doing on your all's behalf. And I think we do have bipartisan support on the bill, but that's the reason we don't have a Senate Republican sponsor, because we ran out of time. The bill essentially does 2 things. One is it creates a working group that would be composed of a variety of stakeholders in this area, right? So parents are a key part of that stakeholder group. Districts, teachers, researchers, experts. We've seen these bills before, right? Where it says you're going to name a working group and it's going to be composed of representatives of the following entities, requirements for some geographic diversity, different types of districts and school settings, and all of that. The working group has a relatively broad charge, and that it is essentially digging into this question and saying, what do we know about how to serve kids with dyslexia? What do we want to do differently as a state, right? Whether that be legislative recommendations, they could be rule changes that you all could consider. They could be changes that districts should consider in the way that they go about implementing or doing this work, right? So it's
guidance.
Guidance, yeah. I mean, there's no limit, I guess is what I would say, on the types of recommendations that the working group can come out with. The point is to have a diverse and complete group of stakeholders at the table on a regular basis to really think about what are we doing, what do we need to be doing better, and coming together as a body to make those recommendations to whomever needs to receive them, right? Obviously, whatever the recommendation is, determine the audience. So that's one key component of the bill. The second thing it does is establish a pilot program to test one potential way of doing a better job serving our kiddos with dyslexia. And that is using our existing READ Act infrastructure. So as you all know, under the existing READ Act, students in kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade are assessed at the beginning of every school year. Districts are required to use are required to use a test that comes off of a list that is composed of scientific and evidence-based tests that the department vets, and you all actually approve that list. So they have to pick one of those tests. Some of those tests that are in use in our districts right now are capable of screening for markers of dyslexia. Not diagnosing, that's because that's different and it's a more in-depth process. But some of those existing tests kidders are taking already right now, we don't have to do anything different in terms of giving the test, can say, you know what, there might be something going on here. This may be an issue here. So what the pilot is intended to do is to take that infrastructure, look at how do we train teachers to better note those markers for dyslexia, and then to what to do about that, right? So now that we've seen a marker for dyslexia, I mean, it's great to identify that, but now we got to take the next step and actually work with those kids and work with them in reading and literacy in a way that, and as you all know, I'm not a teacher or instructor, so my language is not always the best on this, but that actually helps them learn how to read and do all the literacy skills that they need to get. So the two run concurrently. The pilot program does have a longer time frame because it takes time to set something up, and then you have to let it run for a couple of years in order to understand if it's working or not, right? I mean, just by logic. But the working group runs along the same time, can be making recommendations all throughout that same time frame. I mean, they are related, but they're not like one has to happen and then the other one happens. They're both proceeding on parallel paths at the same time. One of the things that we had talked about is the bill as introduced included a requirement that the department hire a dyslexia specialist. Part of what we talked about at the Ledge Contacts was that you all would consider supporting the bill with that language taken out. The conversation we had with Board Member Durham and Board Member Goff around taking that language out is that as department staff ran numbers and basically looked at what's the most cost-effective way to do the body of work contained in the bill, it turns out to be more cost-effective to do it through contractors versus hiring a permanent FTE. So, and I know the motion, I'm aware of the motion on the table does not include the language around that amendment. That's your all's decision, but I wanted to bring that to your attention that we had that conversation, and I'm not sure where you all want to head with that at the moment.
Thank you. Colleagues, comments? Board Member McClellan?
Before we launch into any substantive discussion, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to the parents who have spent their time advocating not only for their own children, but for everybody's kids who may be impacted by any efforts that we can make to do a better job of addressing the needs of dyslexic students. So thank you for the work that you've done. It's very much appreciated.
Great. Thank you. Board Member Rankin?
So are they referring to these students as special needs to have the special attention? Is that correct?
Madam Chair, Board Member Rankin, we don't use the term special needs in the bill. My understanding is that, and again, my expertise is not in providing dyslexia services, that you can have a student who is diagnosed with dyslexia and receiving services kind of through the traditional educational, and sometimes you need an IEP. It's not like other diagnoses.
It's a spectrum, and depending on the severity of the dyslexia, will determine whether they end up in special ed services or regular classroom services.
So it is special needs.
It can be. It can be special ed or classroom needs. It's not a disability, it's a deficiency.
Special needs don't have to be a disability.
Anyway, they're not special ed dollars, I think is what the point is here for some of them. In some cases, it is special ed dollars that service those students.
Is there a fiscal note on this bill?
Yes, there is a fiscal note on the bill. In order to run the working group and run the pilot program.
What is it? I didn't see it online.
So I don't believe it has been published yet.
Okay.
As introduced, I believe it's somewhere in the $250,000 range. With the amendment that we are maybe considering or maybe not considering, that would reduce the cost by $20,000 to $30,000.
Board Member Flores?
So, once will this committee or stakeholder committee, will that be running every year, or will it be just for 1 year?
Madam Chair, Board Member Flores, it is not just for 1 year. It is intended to be an ongoing advisory group. I will tell you that, and I don't know why this is the rule, but when we were in drafting, the drafter told us that you can't do something like that for more than 10 years. So there is a 10-year sunset on the working group in the bill, not because we wanted to end it after 10 years, but just, I guess that's the rule. I'm not really sure why. So there is a cap on it in the bill when you read it, but it's fairly far off.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
So I have a question. Will there be rules related to this? I mean, I have some concerns in looking at our identification of students with deficiency from kindergarten to third grade, noting that the number of new students identified as they're going through the system keeps growing. And I think we would love to find a system where, certainly in the area of dyslexia, that the majority of those students are identified very, very early, rather than the pickup occurring as they're going through school.
Yeah.
Right, because they've lost that time for the special delivery of services, and so I'm not an expert either. I just want to know whether we have an opportunity in the rules to start looking, or to ask the committee to be looking at that. How early should those markers for dyslexia appear? And are there assessments that are better at doing that?
Madam Chair, I think that is exactly the work of the working group, or one of, I should say. I don't think it's limited to that, but I think, the working group shall identify and recommend appropriate dyslexia screening tools and processes, as well as comprehensive assessments that address the recognized challenges of dyslexia. That's from the actual bill. So I think that is one of the key things that the working group would do. I don't know enough to tell you whether that would be a change that would need to happen in statute or in rule or somewhere else guidance. But absolutely, that is I think a very early conversation that it is anticipated the working group will have. And then as they have that conversation, I think they would say, well, where we need to change is the statute, or we need the board to adopt certain rules, or that would come out through that process.
Okay, right. Any other board member Sheffield?
Had there been, I guess it's good to start somewhere, so this is an initial cut at things. But was there any discussion of doing more? I mean, to study an issue that's been studied for decades, and there's really a lot of robust research on really how to address this issue. And you can call it different things, and there's different sectors of individuals involved in education from different perspectives that use different language and taxonomies to explain the issue of students are not reading at grade level, at a proficient level, in huge numbers in our state and across our country. So, we could have another working group, and it could last 10 years, and we could be saying the same thing that we've already said, and we can cite numerous articles. Is this kind of as good as we could get? Why not take the almost $50 million in the READ Act and really deepen it, make it more robust, better linkages between the funds and the students and the assessments? And I don't know, I don't mean to be negative about the bill. I'm sure studying it further is fine, but is that really the only appetite that we have, is just to continue to study a problem that really we've defined quite clearly?
Madam Chair, Board Member Shuffle, that has absolutely been a really robust part of the conversation in developing this bill. One of the things you all had said to me early on as we kind of entered into this exploratory process was that you really wanted to focus on evidence-based, things that if we're going to recommend something, it should be because we have evidence that it will work. And I don't know if you remember, but staff, I think, did a presentation for you all. I can't remember which board meeting it was at. It was sometime in the fall. Where they really did dig into kind of what have other states done. There have been laws passed in other states. And I hate speaking for staff. That feels awkward, but which is why I looked behind me to see if any of them are back there. Oh, Melissa's here. Okay, now Melissa's here. I will say this at a high level, and then if we would like to call them up and we can have a more intense dialogue, happy to do that. There are absolutely people involved in this conversation who believe that we know what to do. We simply lack the political will to do it. There are others involved in this conversation who say lots of things have been tried. We don't have the evidence-based research that we really need to decide how to move forward. And that is a legitimate conversation. It is I think it is just a disagreement. Some people say we do know. Some people say we don't. And that's, part of what the working group is intended to do, is to bring those two perspectives together and find places where we can have agreement and try to move forward. The other thing I will tell you is just that the sponsors of the legislation, because they get to, it's actually their bills and they get to have a say in this, feel, and I always feel awkward, this is the conversations we've had, but both Rep. Buckner and Rep. Wilson have expressed relatively strongly in our conversations that they really do believe that we need to pull people together and have these conversations as the beginning step, that they personally would not be comfortable with legislation that, just kind of dove right into it and required things. And funding is a consideration, right? So, we all are aware of the funding context for schools in our state, and I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't do something because it costs money at all. First of all, that's not my role, but it needs to be a part of the conversation. So that's how and if you want more detail again, I'll certainly defer to the real experts on the research.
I'll add in on that, which is that this is just about dyslexia. And you and I both know that dyslexia is only a small portion of that 60% that we're worried about. And so addressing that is certainly appropriate, but in the meantime, we've probably got a bigger fish to fry in terms of getting all our kids to reading proficiency. The other piece that troubles me a lot, and this comes out of experience in the district, in my home community, it took a couple of years to get the administration to actually focus on this, and it was the parental push, right? There was actually a conscious effort not to get into that because of the fear of the responsibility that would be accepted by the district if in fact they did diagnose. They did address it. And I think that's still out there, and having, hopefully not a very long period of time, but having statewide discussion about this might be a push that this is something that is significant, critical, and we need to go for it. I'm talking about just the dyslexia piece, but I also think there's a bigger thing that we need to be working on. So I think that's part of it. Board Member McClellan.
I just want to share for the record that I do share Dr. Sheffel's sense of urgency, and where we can ascertain that there are teaching methodologies such as structured literacy that may be beneficial for kids with dyslexia and in no way harmful for the educational experience or outcomes of children without dyslexia, then I hope that coming out of this, we can find a smarter way to address this, even if some of the dyslexia goes undiagnosed. If we're improving if we're improving the way that we provide instruction, then we're hitting everybody with a higher quality chance to be able to read on grade level by grade 3.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may, and Board Member McClellan, I think one of the things that has been just an active struggle as we've worked to pull this together is just the local control issue, right? And at the end of the day, it's teachers in the classroom and, schools and districts who are the ones that are delivering these services. The way that our Constitution is structured, doesn't allow us necessarily to kind of, I hear you, I get that. And it really, all of this has been on the table throughout this. I think that's been a real frustration for a lot of folks, right? That we can't require that in a state legislation. Districts have to decide that. I think part of why we've structured this the way we have is to try to give districts incentives and show positive examples, make them say, oh, I want to do that, right? And I don't know that we'll achieve that, frankly, but that's one of the hopes, at least, with the way that it's been put together.
Thank you. Board Member Flores. Oh, I'm sorry.
And one of the things I think we need to remember that in the state we have a need for 6,000 teachers that are not around.
Mhm.
And amongst those are reading specialists and such.
Mhm.
So that haven't been hired either.
Mhm.
And especially in rural areas and larger areas such as mine. So, it's not only looking at it, but then the personnel to train and to follow through on this. So, the monies are needed.
Right.
And we can't working. Well, guess what? We can't get rid of it because we need it. We need probably more, and we need more people, and we certainly need to get a hold of how we're gonna hire 6,000 people in this state and how to fund them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just have one more question.
Please, go ahead, Board Member Shell.
I was just looking for the outcome. Is there a date by which this committee or group would need to submit recommendations or report or something? I was just looking for that.
Madam Chair, Board Member Shuffle, no. I would say the bill is, I mean, we have kind of realized once it got introduced a little bit vague on that topic. It's something that we've offered to clarify. The intention was never that the working group has to wait some really long time to issue recommendations. But I think it's fair to say that the bill could use some clarity around that. There are some conversations we've been having at the Capitol to kind of say to folks who feel strongly about that, like, great. I mean, I conceptually, I think we're on the same page. Help us understand what feels the best to you. Is it an annual report? Is it some other sort of mechanism? So I think the sponsors have been really willing to make that more specific. We haven't quite landed on what exactly that will look like yet, but there's absolutely a willingness to do that.
I mean, especially since there's a fiscal note, it would be great if there could be a deliverable with some clarity.
Sure.
You know, on date certain.
Can that be put in rules if it's not in the legislation? Probably not, huh?
Madam Chair, I don't know that the board has a rulemaking authority around the working group, but I mean, I think we can put it in the statute, and I'm certainly, so part of this is you all are deciding what position you want to take. If you want to make that part of your position, you know, I can tell you that I think that will be well received, and I'm happy to continue, frankly, to work on that line of changes.
Go ahead.
I think that would be helpful, just because it's easy to keep talking about an issue, but there really is very definitive research. If this group will come together around what we know. I think there's sometimes a tendency to say we don't know everything, so we can't know anything. Actually, we know a lot, and there's really steps we could take tomorrow. So I think there's an urgency about getting that some
Great.
deliverable out.
Board Member Goff?
Yes, I'm sorry, on our copy of the bill, on page 10, it does outline some dates. At the end of the 22-23 school year, the department would evaluate the implementation of the pilot program and the effectiveness of the strategies. And on or before December 31st, 2023, that is when the state board and the education committees at the legislature would get a report concerning the implementation and evaluation. That report might include any recommendations for legislation that the department deems necessary based on the evaluation. So with further discussion, it might be something to consider as it moves through the process. Maybe there's a way to shorten that timeline, do some changing to get things on a little bit shorter timeline.
Madam Chair and Board Member Goff, absolutely, you're right that language is in there. That is specific to the pilot program, so that's in the section of the bill that's about the pilot program, not the working group. So the working group does not have to wait that long. And I understand, I know that there has been questions about that, and again, that's why I think there's a huge willingness to clarify that the working group does not have to wait for the pilot program to complete. There have also been conversations about shortening the time frame for the pilot program, and I think those are, you know, legitimate and ongoing conversations. There's a little bit of a balance there because it becomes a trade-off between, you know, data validity and data reliability and persuasive power of the pilot versus speed, and I think reasonable people can fall on different sides of that trade-off, and that's an active conversation.
Board Member Durham?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of things. One is Dr. Flores mentioned the teacher shortage, and I think it's time that we address that in a more practical and factual way. There is not, to my knowledge, any quantification of a teacher shortage that yields the number of 6,000. And number one. Number two, I think I would agree there is a teacher shortage, but it is confined to subject matter specialists, primarily mathematics, chemistry, and physics, and it is confined geographically primarily to rural areas. Then, other than that, this myth or this great public concern about this overall teacher shortage is misplaced, that we do not have a teacher shortage per se. We have a subject matter shortage and we have a geographic shortage. That's number one. Number two, this bill, I think, still contains, Ms. Mello, one FTE for the department. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, Vice Chair Durham, yes, as introduced, the bill contains a requirement the department hire a dyslexia specialist.
I think as the department has done its research, I believe it's concluded that it would be less expensive to the taxpayer to contract this work out in the short run. I think it's also not particularly good policy to add a staff person that you don't know is going to be a continuing, ongoing staff person, so that if we contract for the work, my understanding is we'll save the taxpayers money, number one, and number two, we won't put ourselves in a position of having an employee for which funding is no longer provided in several years from now. So I think we ought to support the bill in either form, but I hope you would work to let particularly the Appropriations Committee know there's a less expensive way to do it than the bill introduced, and that it's a better policy from our perspective not to add the FTE at this time.
Madam Chair,
Thank you.
Vice Chair Durham, I hear you on that, and I just want to summarize where we are so far, and then I know we're not finished with the discussion, but I believe what I'm hearing is, so you are going to decide shortly, you're going to take a vote on your position on the bill. If that position is to support, there are two areas you've identified that you'd like me to work on in the bill. One is the staff person you just mentioned, Mr. Vice Chair. The other is this kind of deliverable from the working group and putting some more specifics around that. Have I accurately summarized the discussion so far, or am I missing something?
Yes.
Okay.
Do we need to change our motion for that? No.
I don't think so. I mean, not from my, I don't know. I mean, sorry, I'm used to looking over here. I'll look over there. I mean, I feel like I understand what you're saying. We've all said this on the public record. Everybody's here and hearing what we're saying. So,
Okay. Board Member Rank. Oh,
I think
are you
Jennifer
finished?
understands her,
Yep.
what the board would like, and if it's achievable, great, but if it's not, then we'll take the bill as is. But I think the bill would be a better bill if it had deliverables, and it would be a better bill if it appropriated the funds but not required us to hire an FTE. Thank you.
Board Member Rankin.
Madam Chair, I have two questions. First one is on page 11 of the bill, section 3, where it says, declares this act is necessary for the immediate preservation of the public peace, health, and safety. What kind of peace are we getting at here?
You're seeing it right now. Things are peaceful here.
Thank you. The second question
Sorry, that was
is-
snarky, but I don't know.
On the proposed motions, do we have an option to monitor, or do we only have a support, oppose, and support with an amendment? And I didn't see an amendment on here, so I wouldn't know.
So, Madam Chair, Board Member Rankin, in terms of your first question, that's a safety clause that was put in the bill. The sponsors decided that they wanted that safety clause because they do feel some sense of urgency, and so they wanted the bill to be implemented as quickly as possible. It was their decision. In terms of the motions, I think you have a motion on the table to support. You can make any motion you want to. I mean, that's your prerogative. You could do a substitute motion to oppose, a substitute motion to monitor, a substitute motion to support with some amendments. I mean, that's all your prerogative, and I'm happy to help however I can.
Perfect. Any other comments, concerns? Board Member Flores.
I just wanted to kind of not contradict you, Mr. Durham. I just wanted to, the reason I said the number that I did was from a presentation from Tracy Rainey, who is a researcher and works with a physical group in education, who did bring up this number. And it was at the League of Women Voters presentation that I went to last week. And so she was speaking specifically, I believe, towards larger groups, probably rural areas, but specifically to Denver and the greater area around here. And I do believe when I go to classrooms in Denver, they are large. They're very large. And so there's no, I don't think there's no question, and that there is a need to hire teachers, and we are trying to do, the department is trying to do their best to recruit teachers for Denver. So, and that was a number that was brought up by this person who has been doing a lot of research in this area.
Board Member Durham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Flores, Ms. Rainey represents an organization that has a point of view, and that point of view is to generally create a sense of crisis around public education, its funding, and other issues. So it's a little, let's just say that I suspect her point of view is a little biased. Secondly, if there were a 6,000 teacher shortage, that would be about, in rough terms, about 11% of the workforce where they were short. If that were the case, you would have 6,000 postings of vacancies for unfilled positions. Those simply don't exist, and by any measure, they don't exist. So there really is no evidence to show the number 6,000. You can go to some districts.
We are going to have teachers that are going to retire,
Well,
and a large number of teachers, these are baby boomers, that are going to retire. We're going to need a large force of people. Denver Public Schools has, 5,000 teachers? So we're not talking about, something like, well, I'm not exaggerating, and I don't think she was exaggerating as well. So we can talk about this later, if you don't mind.
This is a good time to talk about it, because I think for too long, at least, and I will take my own responsibility for this, I've sort of let this commentary pass, and it's now becoming an accepted fact, and it simply is not a fact. If there were 6,000, if there was a shortage of 6,000 teachers, you would have 6,000 job postings.
We will have.
The fact is, well, I lost my crystal ball on the way to the meeting this morning, so I don't know if we're going to have a shortage or not.
Okay.
And I don't think Ms. Rainey does either. So,
We
but
already
right
have a
now, we do
shortage.
not have a shortage of 6,000 teachers. We have a geographic shortage in some areas of the state where it is where it's difficult to hire not only teachers but other professionals. And we have a subject matter shortage where competition in the private sector pays salaries that are substantially greater than can be paid for those positions in the public sector. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure. Are we ready to vote? With the agreement that we, in addition to the motion to support the bill, which was made by Board Member McClellan and seconded by Board Member Flores, do I have that right?
No. I moved it.
I'm sorry.
I don't remember.
I'm trying to help you, Ms. Van Pelt, but I'm probably making it worse for you. If you've got it.
I've got that Board Member Goff motioned and Board Member McClellan seconded.
Thank you very much. I'm glad you did that, because I didn't. Are we ready to vote on that with the understanding that we are going to ask Ms. Mello to encourage some modifications to the bill as, would you call the vote, please?
Board Member Durham,
Yes.
Board Member Flores,
Yes.
Board Member Goff,
Yes.
Board Member McClellan,
Yes.
Board Member Rankin,
No.
Board Member Sheppel,
Yes.
Board Member Schroeder,
Yes. Okay, we'll now consider Senate Bill 19-069 concerning non-public schools' authority to operate certain teacher development programs. Do I have a motion? Ms. Goff, I would guess you and Mr. Durham ought to be helping us with the motion since you've had a heads up. Mr. Durham, do you want to try?
I'll move to support Senate Bill 1969.
Do I have a second?
Second?
Thank you, Ms. Flores. Any discussion? Yeah.
Just
Please
a
give us a
this one
brief.
is actually pretty simple. So, for a number of years, the department reviewed induction programs, kind of regardless of what type of entity was providing those induction programs. Came to their attention that actually the way the statute was written only allowed you to do that for public non-charter schools. That's how statute was written. It's just how the statute was written. So last year there was legislation that you all supported that explicitly allowed the department to review induction programs for charter schools. This bill is almost exactly the same, except for it's for private schools. They call them non-public schools in the bill, but that's what we're talking about as private schools. So it's a really pretty simple bill. It kind of clarifies and allows a continuation of a practice that had gone on for a very long time. I think part of why we at Ledge Context we discussed a support position is because you supported the bill last year to do this for public charter schools.
Great. Thank you. Any discussion?
I just have
Board Member Goff?
Just have a question. What's the status of this bill right now? Has it gone through a chamber completely?
Madam Chair, Board Member Goff, yes, the bill is through the Senate, and I don't believe there was any objections to the bill in the Senate. I could double check that though.
Ms. Van Pelt, would you
Can
call the roll?
somebody else second that?
Pardon?
Can somebody else second that?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you catch that, Ms. Van Pelt?
Yes, I did.
We had a
I didn't
retraction.
catch it, what happened?
We had a retraction of the second.
So, so she asked with permission to withdraw her second?
Mhm.
And you granted that permission?
Yes, she did.
Okay, perfect. I missed that part.
Remember that part about peace? What was that in that bill?
We should add a safety clause to all board actions.
Safety clause, thank you. Would you call, please?
A
Call.
safety clause.
Yes.
Board Member Durham?
Yes.
Board Member Flores?
No.
Board Member Goff?
Yes.
Board Member McClellan?
Yes.
Board Member Rankin?
Yes.
Board Member Sheffel?
Yes.
Madam Chair?
Yes. If you say that, I might not know who you're talking about. Just do it carefully. All right, we'll now consider House Bill 19-1032 concerning comprehensive human sexuality education and in connection therewith making an appropriation. Do I have a motion? Board Member McClellan.
I move to support HB 19-1032 concerning comprehensive human sexuality education and in connection therewith making an appropriation.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Forrest. Discussion, comments, colleagues? Board Member Rankin?
This was an extremely controversial bill and had 11 hours of testimony, of which I sat through 5 hours of it. And I think this bill is not, it needs more vetting. It's not ready to be put forth. And I have great concerns about these requirements in the small rural areas, but across the state. I think it's very concerning. And I will definitely be a no vote on this.
Okay, thank you. I didn't ask you to give a summary.
Madam Chair, I'm happy to do so, or, okay.
Short, short and sweet?
Yes, I will do my
Okay.
very best to be short and sweet. So the bill clarifies content requirements for public schools that offer comprehensive human sexuality education. Districts do not have to offer sex ed. That is a choice that districts currently have under the law. They would continue to have that choice under this bill. However, if they choose to offer it, they must offer it in compliance with the terms of this legislation, which outlines in a fair amount of detail kind of what that content should look like or not look like. And I'm happy to read it, but you asked me to be short, so I will be that. There's also an existing grant program that's run by the Department of Public Health and Environment, and it makes some changes to that grant program and puts another $1 million into that.
Is it aligned with our health standards?
Ah, great question.
Madam Chair, I do not know the answer to that question.
Sorry.
Madam Chair, I don't know that we have done a one-to-one. We have health standards in general that deal with some of these larger topics, but again, not down to the detail. So I think there's some elements that are covered in the standards, but I would say probably not to the level of detail that this bill outlines. But we have not done a one-to-one, so I can't answer 100%.
Okay. Board Member Flores?
I think we probably did a great injustice if some of these concepts are not included in our standards, because I do believe that this is, you know, in information and that I think our students should have. So, and I can't see how, if we have it in our standards, which I think we do have it in our standards, then I think school districts should follow what's in our standards, because this is information that they will need for life, for living a healthy, long life.
Thank you. Board Member Sheffel?
Yeah, there's been just a lot of interest in this bill. I have, from parents, certainly constituents in my district, and I think the issue of parental rights, local control figure hugely into this discussion. I'm very concerned about it, just as far as parents' ability to address this issue, so I'll be a no vote as well.
Board Member McClellan?
I just want to note that this bill does not take away a parent's right to opt their child out of sex education. It merely requires that if there is publicly funded sex education, that it must be comprehensive and not abstinence only, and it must be inclusive of these concepts, which are good concepts for us to be including. Accurate information is the least that we can provide students with, so that they can make healthy choices going forward. And I think it's worth noting that the agency who's in charge of monitoring the compliance with this is the Colorado Department of Health and Environment, and not the CDE. So I think that supporting a good bill that helps to address the issue of rising STI rates with comprehensive fact-based information is a positive bill, and I think that we should support it. Sexually transmitted infections, correct. STDs and STIs, both are concepts that we need to be aware of, and STI is sexually transmitted infection, for those who didn't know what STI meant. Thanks.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
given the education we just had just now, I would vote yes on this if it was an opt-in. I think we should change it to an opt-in.
What? Well, you don't get to opt in Colorado
know.
standards.
No.
So I hate the thought of giving yet another task to the department. I'm going to support this bill. Nevertheless, I would appreciate confirmation that this aligns with, it doesn't have to include everything in the bill, but that it does align with the standards that we adopted. I would not want to think that, or I would want to know if the legislation in fact goes contrary to anything that we approved as a board last year.
Madam Chair, I mean, I will certainly work with your staff to
Yeah, I'm really
make sure that
sorry.
we get that.
But I just think we want to be warned for.
It's a fair
for
question, and I
on-
apologize that I wasn't, that I
Okay.
didn't anticipate it and wasn't better prepared for it.
Thank you. Board Member Durham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Mennel, help me see if I have an understanding of the bill. That I think Ms. McClellan is correct that it doesn't affect the ability to opt out of sex education for parents, but I believe it changes the definition of what sex education is and removes the requirement for notification of parents. Is that correct?
Board Member Durham, that is a great question that I can't answer off the top of my head. I can read and try to do that. I can't talk and read at the same time. I can do
Yeah,
lots of
the old
things at
law
the same
certainly-
time.
The old law
Um,
certainly did have it.
So I'm happy to look into that. So I just want to make sure I'm clear on what your question is does the bill change the fact that parents have to be notified that sex ed is going to happen?
The answer is it does. I mean, I.
Okay, great.
I
Well,
never
fair
ask
enough.
a question you don't know the answer to.
I mean,
Thank you.
Is this in the
Yeah.
interest of peace?
The answer is it does, and I think the,
It does, I'm sorry, it does what? It does?
it does remove a requirement for notification of
Well, if
parents.
they're gonna have sex ed.
And so I think the rub with the bill is really what Dr. Schroeder indicated. And that is that it really, we all mouth the platitude that we want parental involvement. And this is the kind of bill that says, well, we really don't mean that. We really don't want parents to be involved. We want to keep them in the dark. We don't want to notify them about what's going on in the classroom. And that's fundamentally what's wrong with the bill. And it not only does, but should cause every parent great concern about what's going on in their schools. And it really should, the message that it sends in plain English is, we're not going to tell you. I think that's a bad message to send to parents. I think it undermines confidence in public education. And full disclosure is always, I think, preferable to less disclosure. I think we live in a society that generally demands full disclosure, and for good reason. So what makes this a bad bill is the way that it treats parents, which, without getting into detail, it's really the mushroom effect. And we all know in graphic terms what that means. So I intend to vote no on this motion for that reason, that this is an anti-parent, it's an anti-parent participation bill, and it's a clear message to parents that we don't want your participation. Because if we did want your participation, we would be very forthcoming about what's going on in the classroom. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
Mr. Richard, so I want to be respectful of the fact that I know that people have very strong beliefs and feelings on this topic. If you don't mind, I'd like to just read you a portion of the bill that addresses the topic we're on right now, because I think that I'm just going to read it, and then you guys can decide how you, what you think about that. So the bill says, except as otherwise provided in subsection 4 of this section, a public school that offers human sexuality instruction shall provide to the parent or guardian of each student, prior to commencing the instruction, written notification of the ability to excuse a student without penalty or additional assignment upon the written request of the student's parent or guardian, and a detailed substantive outline of the topics and materials to be presented during the human sexuality instruction. And then it goes on, and I think this is the part that you're talking about right now, to say, however, nothing in this section requires written notification for programming on gender, gender expression, sexual orientation, or healthy relationships that occurs outside the context of human sexuality instruction. And so that, the part that I just read to you, I think is the part that has, a number of folks have raised the concern that Vice Chair Durham is raising as it relates to that particular language.
Yes, Mr. Durham?
Yeah, I think there are those who don't know the meaning of the word is, but I think most of us have a common understanding of what the word however means, and it's quite clear of its context in this particular paragraph. So I think that my comments stand. The language is patently clear.
Board Member McClellan?
Just to clarify my understanding, Ms. Mello, did I understand correctly that a detailed description of what's being taught in comprehensive sex education is available? Did I understand that correctly? And that parents' right to opt out is firmly preserved? Did I understand both of those things correctly?
Madam Chair, Board Member McClellan, I would say that yes, districts are required to provide written notification to parents and to provide details about that. I think the crux of the conversation is that if some of these topics are being talked about outside of a sex education context, there's no notification or opt-out provided in that scenario. So it depends on whether the district is doing it in a sex ed, saying this is sex ed, or if they're not saying it's sex ed, and then there's just different rules apply in those two circumstances.
So if I might, just to make sure that I'm understanding correctly, so for example, if a history teacher was teaching contemporary topics and they discussed issues surrounding Stonewall, for example, they wouldn't necessarily have to send a separate notification home related to this bill, because that's a separate, that discussion is happening in a separate manner. Am I understanding correctly?
Madam Chair, Board Member McClellan, I think yes. Yes. So if in a social studies class you're talking about, and it's these 4 specific topics, gender expression, sexual orientation, or healthy relationships, then you would not need to provide written notification to parents, and parents would not have the choice under this bill to say, you know, I'd rather my child not participate in that conversation.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I'm a strong yes vote. Thanks.
Any more comments? Would you call-
Literature.
Would you call the vote, please?
Board Member Durham,
No.
Board Member Flores,
Yes.
Board Member Goff,
Yes.
Board Member McClellan,
Yes.
Board Member Rankin.
No.
Board Member Shuffle,
No.
Board Member Schroeder.
Yes.
So we've got 4 yeses to 3 nos.
Thank you. I will change my mind and request a re-vote on this in the event we find that there is some sort of a conflict with our standards. This is important to me, that the standards we adopted are still aligned with this legislation. I always worry about legislation when it starts getting curricular, et cetera.
Madam Chair.
So if you'll help, I'm really sorry to ask for that, but hopefully it's not a huge, how long is this bill? I confess I didn't read it.
30 pages.
The bill is about 13 pages. Is that I'm sorry, I'm not sure
Yeah,
that's the question you're
13
asking. I
pages.
did like, by the way, that new verb you just created. Curricula. I know that we are way over our time, so unless you have anything else that, and if there's I'm available to you if you have questions, concerns. This is not the only forum in which you can get that from me. So with that.
Any other comments, folks? So let's just remember that we can change our positions on bills as they're going through the system because they get amended. There's more information, et cetera. But for now, this is where we are. Board Member Rankin?
I want to go back to my earlier question. We only have the opportunity to monitor one of these. Is that something different, or should that be on our motion?
I
'Cause
think generally we want to have all 3 options included.
So it should have been.
So
on
what
okay.
happens, I think, is that staff kind of takes the cues from our 2 legislative
I got it.
folks, and it may or may not include all the options that the 7 of us want. So I think as a general rule, if that's okay, that we have all 3 options available.
Mhm.
Clearly, we want your recommendation and your motions, but you're right, we should have had.
Those
had that.
motions are always available.
Right,
But
it's
they
just that they weren't in the.
They
in the
may
script.
not weren't printed, but they're always available.
And Madam Chair, if I may, I'll
That's
just
up to you, Heather.
reiterate that
Make stuff up.
when your legislative contacts make a recommendation to monitor a bill, that is not something we, by routine, bring before the full board. You all have the prerogative to ask us to bring up any bill or any topic at any time. On Fridays, when I send out that weekly report, the link to the bill chart is in there, and that has all the bills we've talked about at the legislative context, and it'll say recommend monitor if that's been the recommendation. And if you would prefer a better method of tracking some of that, I'm happy to talk about doing it in a way that works better for you all. But that's how you can kind of tell what we've discussed.
That suggests that on Friday night, you want us to go through that list.
I suggest nothing of the sort on Friday night,
Oh,
but
I heard
perhaps
you. I heard you
Monday
clearly.
morning.
Board Member Goff?
There is a Friday night? Question just for my own clarity, but also maybe it's of use to everyone. The bill chart that you sent to, you send to us, is that basically limited for state board viewing? In other words, it's a reflection of where the state board is only, or is that a combination of other things?
Madam Chair, Board Member Goff. So that is a link that you all, anybody on the state board can use, any department. It's basically for you all as my client, right? So I pay for the software that produces that report. So it's not something we could necessarily post in a newsletter that would be for general distribution, just because of that dynamic to it. But yeah, I mean, you all are free to use it. Any staff is free to use it.
No, I might.
But it's public knowledge.
Thank you. My question was, is the recommended column,
Mhm.
that reflects only our status
Oh.
of view, our
Apologies.
discussions are such and such. In the board docs and on the public board docs agenda pages, when this item was entered, we had a summary of where the ledge contacts were on each of these bills.
Mhm.
The chart that we saw and the page in the agenda is in conflict.
Okay.
So the board saw two things.
Apologies.
And,
That's-
and it was my position, whatever my recommendation was. So, we had some consistency with that conversation, but
Okay.
it did come out differently in the two versions.
Okay.
information.
So Madam Chair and Board Member Goff, my apologies for that.
I don't know where
that's,
that-
I'm sure it's a mistake on my end. I will own it, and I will endeavor to make fewer mistakes in the future. I probably can't
Okay.
promise I'll never make one again. In fact, I definitely can't promise that, but I will try, because I think accuracy really matters on something like that. And it's, as you guys are considering decisions, you need to have accurate information about where your ledge contacts are. So I apologize, and will be mindful.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hurry across the street, I suppose.
Well, I think Senate Ed is done, so.
Worked out. Next item on our agenda is consideration of certification of state share entitlements pursuant to the School Finance Act. I ask that staff give a brief presentation of this item before I take a motion. Commissioner Anthony?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I think I'm turning my mic off. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to turn this over to Ms. Oakes, our Chief Operating Officer.
Great, thank
Welcome.
you. So this is just our regular update. This is the third update this year related to the certification of the state share payments out to districts. The reason for this is because, so we came to you initially at the beginning of the fiscal year to certify those payments from July through November. We came again for you to, last month, to certify the December payments. Those were updated based upon the pupil counts, the new assessed valuations, just that mid-year true-up process. And this is that final last little true-up for the rest of the year, January through June. There's only $170,000 different from the last month, and that's just the final little tweaks of adjusting pupil counts and assessed valuations based upon updated data from districts and counties. So it's less than 0.5% of what different from what you approved last month.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any questions?
Any questions, folks?
Well, I
I'd like
just-
to entertain a motion, please. Somebody make the motion and have that big number in it.
I move to certify that the January through June 2019 state share monthly entitlements to districts in the amount of $367,849,715.19.
I second that.
Thank you. Have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any more comments, questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Good. That passes unanimously. Thank you very much. All right, we're off schedule, but the next item is now public comment. Thank you for your patience. Each individual is limited to 3 minutes, and Ms. Van Pelt will tell you when your time is up. Before we begin, as a reminder for the board and the public, the State Board of Education has a very narrow authority in charter school disputes, and the board handles such cases differently than other matters. On most issues that come before us, public input is a significant factor in our decision. However, disputes between charter schools and districts are considered formal legal appeals, and the state board members must serve as impartial judges in that proceedings. The board is required to consider only the materials that are submitted by the charter in the district and decide whether the law was followed. Because of the special status given to these proceedings under the law, the board cannot consider letters or outside materials sent in from the public and cannot entertain comments about the appeal, which is tomorrow, in our public comment meeting. And also please note that signs and banners will not be allowed in state board meetings. So we've had one individual sign up for public comment, Alexis Harrigan. 3 minutes, please.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the board. My name is
morning.
Alexis Harrigan. I'm the Director of State Government Affairs for Code.org, a nonprofit dedicated to the expansion of K-12 computer science. In 2018, we applauded the state when an additional $500,000 was appropriated by the legislature for an elementary school computer science teacher grant program. Last summer, 2 professional development providers, Boot Up PD and MindSpark Learning, were in ongoing communications with the CDE staff regarding the implementation of the grant program. The providers, one of which is a local nonprofit that we've partnered with for the last 2 years, submitted proposals to offer statewide professional learning with an explicit focus on serving rural teachers. Award letters were sent from CDE staff to each provider on July 29, 2018. Negotiations between the providers and CDE staff continued through August and September as they worked through the implementation details. Our understanding is that the award letters were sent out without authorization. The result, unfortunately, was the dismissal of a staff member and a retraction of the contracts awarded to these 2 providers, who have a history of providing high-quality training to Colorado teachers. Since that time, Code.org and the providers have operated in good faith that the department would improve the process to ensure quality, equity, and school district choice. It is clear this is no longer the case. Each of the interested parties were assured by department staff they would receive advance notice of the public announcement of the elementary grant program. Unfortunately, we were all caught off guard when we saw the announcement about the partnership with the Colorado School of Mines that mirrored the proposal developed by our partner. This announcement was made with coordinated PR and earned media with the CDE staff. The department has informed us that the School of Mines was chosen as the grant provider because 2 districts because they are a state agency, and one state agency can transfer funds directly to another to avoid an RFP process. This is because opening an RFP process would have excluded the 2 providers who were previously in communications with the department. This in and of itself is problematic, considering the program actually lists the original providers, Boot Up PD and MindSpark Learning, as potentially eligible for funding from districts if districts were to choose them. This in and of it, in addition, while all 3 providers are potentially eligible, it is very clear that this is not a level playing field. The program information advertised by the department advertises the partnership with Mines as free professional development and offers substantial stipends to teachers, while the other providers are just listed as eligible. And districts have to go through a more burdensome process to access funding for professional learning from Boot Up PD or MindSpark Learning. Furthermore, all of the department's messaging and press outreach focuses only on the School of Mines option. Districts and teachers will be motivated to choose the Mines option program over the other providers who are listed as secondary options. I would encourage you to call for a thorough review of the quality of the programming, ask for a plan for improving the procurement process so this does not happen again. I ask that you do all of this before you approve the grant recommendations that will be made by staff at next month's board meeting. Code.org and members of our coalition commit to working with interested members of this body and department staff to create a state computer science strategic plan to ensure that the rollout of funding and adoption of policies align to a common goal of ensuring all students have access to high-quality computer science in their classrooms. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else here?
Can we get a copy of that?
Sure. Could you share a copy of your notes, please? Thank you. I'm going to suggest, please, that we take about a 10-minute break.
Thank you.
We are going to give approval for school transformation grant funding. I have to say, I realize they changed the name, and it kind of, I have to remind myself what it is.
We'll remind you.
Are you speaking into your mic?
No, thank you. So the next item is consideration of school transformation grant applicants. Commissioner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to turn this over to Lindsay Jackold, our Director of Turnaround Support, and Alan Dillon, our Associate Commissioner of School Quality and Support.
Hi. Good morning. As Board Chair Schroeder introduced, we are here today to give you a little bit of background on the School Transformation Grant. It does have a name change and a little bit of a purpose change, and approve 20 district applicants to receive funding for our school improvement activities through the School Transformation Grant. So the School Transformation Grant background is, you may recall that House Bill 1355 expanded the use of our state grant funds from only supporting turnaround leadership development to a broader scope of school improvement activities. So previously, this was the School Turnaround Leadership Development Grant that supported those leadership development programs, but it, in its new form, expands it to cover a broader range of school improvement activities, which we'll talk about in just a second. This fiscal year, we have $1.9 million in state funding available to distribute to districts and schools. Districts and schools must have a priority improvement and turnaround plan type in order to be eligible for the state funding. And districts applied for these resources through the Empowering Action for School Improvement application, or what we affectionately call the EASY application. So as a reminder, you approved the revision to these rules in the fall of 2018. And I want to make clear that this is not all of the school improvement funding that's available. It's just the state funding, which we'll talk about in just 1 second.
So the schools, the 20 districts, are they the ones that don't fall in the federal piece?
Yes.
Oh, there you go.
So yes and no. So CDE has worked really hard over the past year to streamline our funding sources for our for both the state and federal funding sources for districts, so that they see a single application and we do some of that allocation on the back end. So under ESSA, we now have some schools that are identified only under the federal system and some that are identified under the state and federal. We use our federal funding for that bucket of schools. We use the state funding for those schools that only fall under the state system.
And is it adequate?
No, but I'll walk through
Okay,
the amounts
thank you.
in just a second. So we have more resources available under ESSA and a pretty limited pool under the limited amount under the state funding. So again, today we're just talking about state. So these districts will have received additional school improvement funding through the federal side. So under the expansion of the grant, we previously only included the school turnaround leadership development, but now under EASY, districts had what are essentially 4 routes they could apply for funding. The first route we call CDE offered services. That includes those leadership development programs, the turnaround network, and Connect for Success. We have another route we call exploration that includes the accountability clock pathways and planning, our diagnostic review and improvement planning programs. We had another route called district design and led that we let districts develop an intervention to support their schools locally, and we provide supports for that. And then another route called specialized services that includes early literacy professional development for districts. So now this grant can support all of those routes. So we're going to walk through the funding recommendations next. And a reminder, your role is to approve the recommended grant applications, and we recommend approval at this time so that the districts can begin implementing their activities. So in your packet, you have a spreadsheet that breaks down the funding in more detail than is in the PowerPoint, so you can see by district with more specificity. But by route, this is the amount requested we had for each of the different routes. So for leadership and network and Connect for Success, those CD offered services, exploration, district design and led, and specialized services for a total of $1,899,266. So we write in that $1.9 million. The next slide shows you the distribution by district. The asterisk denotes which ones are small rural, and it ends up being about 9 of the 20. So about 50% of them are small rural districts. The schools that fall under these districts are listed in your spreadsheets if you want more information. But so while this grant expanded the use of the funding to other programs beyond Turnaround Leadership, we know that Turnaround Leadership remains a priority, and so I wanted to still provide you all with the program applicants for the leadership development programs because it remained really popular. So this year, federal funding could support participation in these leadership development programs, and we had about 108 participant applications for their leadership programs this year. And there's a more detailed breakdown of who for each of these programs in your packet as well. So some key information is that, yes, our requests for grants far exceeded our available funding. For Turnaround Leadership, Turnaround Network, and Diagnostic Review, what you see in front of you are multiple year grants. So we recommend sort of a multi-year funding right now. So for spring 2019 into the 2019-20 school year. The Connect for Success and Accountability Pathways, we actually split it up and earmarked the funding for next year because those routes include some planning activities and then full implementation. We did this so that we could serve a broader number of schools. If we only did a single year funding with the initial request, we would have had about 3.4 million in requests and only have 1.9 to distribute. So this means we already have earmarked 1.4 for continuation funding. As a reminder, we have a decision item across the street that we're hopeful to increase the amount of funding to support districts because the demand remains pretty high for these school improvement activities. So that's where we are at, and that was a pretty quick walkthrough, but want to open it up for any questions.
Thank you. Can we begin with a motion, please? Board Member McClellan.
I move to approve the recommended applicants for school transformation grant funding.
Thank you. It's a proper motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Board Member Goff, thank you. Discussion, questions, folks? Board Member Shepherd?
Can you just speak to if this works? I mean, the theory of action behind any funding allocation and implementation is really important to examine, to determine if the money does anything. And I didn't know how some of these service providers end up on the list and others don't, and then how they get off the list. Let's say 3 entities use them and nothing really gets any better. Do they get off the list? And then do the schools ever say, this made a huge difference and here's our data to show it? It's just a lot of money. And you're asking for more money. And the question is the premise behind allocating the funds for these tasks, does it work?
Yes, so I can speak to 2 different sort of evaluation pieces of information that we have, and I also want to note that our decision item includes funding for additional program evaluation because we really want to dive deeper into that. But we have done some initial data analysis of the CDE offered services, so those Connect for Success and Turnaround Network, and we're seeing that that has had a positive impact on helping schools get off the clock and stay off the clock. So it exceeds what would just happen naturally. That intervention is leading to more schools coming off the clock. As far as the School Turnaround Leadership Development Program, the data that we collect right now is a little more limited in self-reporting from participants in program evaluations. And so I did pull from our last year's data from that survey that participants are self-reporting that the programs are leading to sustained change in their schools, and it surveys participants and people in their schools, and that the quality of the experience is worth it. The providers do pre and post assessments, and majority, about 80% of our program providers are seeing effects change on systems like data teams, leadership teams, instructional coaching, the frequency and quality of leadership coaching in our schools. So we need to do more data analysis on how the impact on student achievement, but we're seeing from a participant standpoint that these providers are having an impact on keeping our leaders building their practice in programs.
How do people get on and off the list?
Yeah, we have an annual request for information process that we issue where they need to answer questions around their program design, how their program aligns to the research behind turnaround leadership competencies in particular, how they measure their own effectiveness and their track record in developing turnaround leaders. They apply, we review and approve them. We have had people apply who are not approved, who don't meet a bar of having demonstrated a track record in either locally or not here. The only reason we've had people to date not come off the list is because folks in the field haven't selected them. So we've had providers who the field just hasn't opted into, but the ones who remain on the list continue to have people participating.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Board Member Rankin.
How do they measure their own success?
Most of our program providers at the moment do reporting on turnaround leadership competency, so principals' ability to lead change in their building, their instructional expertise, and that's what the programs are tracking, is observing and giving feedback and have ways that each program measures the leader's development. Each of the programs also tracks student achievement data, but that's not something that we have set up in a program evaluation to collect aggregate over each of the programs yet, but we hope to do coming forward.
So I guess I didn't pose my question clearly. Is it a third party that evaluates and knows what to evaluate, or is it the people themselves?
Right now, it is, we collect the survey information from the participants.
So it's a survey.
Yeah, yeah.
Love surveys.
We collect that information annually. Each of the providers, though, has their own program evaluation that they collect, that they share with us, that they need to self-report.
Which is another survey,
Yeah.
actually.
Some of them are observations, so of a quality review of a school, a pre and post.
Board Member Flores.
Are these leaders, for instance, getting a certificate from the state? They're not. So they don't take up an administrator's test at the end of.
Some of the some of the programs do include the University of Denver program. One of the University of Denver programs does have a master's degree and certification as a part of it. Some of the others don't. The programs have a wide range of services they provide, so that districts can select one that is the best fit for them.
So a second question. Could we include a final administrator's test that that they could take just along that other?
Yeah, that's something to think about and a good incentive to think about how to incentivize and sort of denote folks who've completed these activities as building our sort of leadership cadre across the state.
We have teacher tests and we have administrators tests, and that would, I think, kind of be a good evaluation, whether they know the subject matter and something to consider, I think.
Okay. Board Member Sheffield.
No, I would just say, though, that the proof that whether or not this works would be that schools come off the clock.
Exactly.
And you could give them a test, they could know something, but to know and to do is a different thing, right? So I guess I'd hate to see us put a test in place, even though I understand what you're saying.
Yeah,
I think it'd be great to know that people are,
But
schools are
given the
coming off
amounts
the
of
clock
money.
because of student achievement.
Yeah, given the amounts of money that we see here, I like a kind of proof. Can they pass the Educational Testing Administrators Conference? I'm just saying that. I don't know. I think ETS does have a test, or just
So-
like the teacher's test.
Do you
And
have a
I
comment,
think-
Board Commissioner?
I do. Just Board Member Shuffle too, and just for everyone, we did run some of the numbers on the folks that are in these grant programs as compared to other schools and districts that are not receiving these funds, and we do see a higher percentage of the folks that are in these grant programs coming off the clock. So we do need to, my data folks are like, don't overpromise, but so we do need to do some additional analysis of that, but we see some really good successes with these programs that we want to build on, and we want to get more in-depth analysis on to make sure that we're really seeing the changes we want to see. But we have seen good improvements.
Thank you. So, as you're promising data to us, Commissioner, I am interested in long-term change, right? We were very pleased with the number of districts that did go off the clock after our reviews the last time around. Not all stayed off the clock. I'm also interested in terms, in particular around the leadership, is mobility. I mean, I find that we do an awful lot of investment in our leaders, and we have some great success, and we just have an awful lot of mobility in that area. And I don't have a secret for stopping it, but I think it would be helpful to acknowledge it, to measure it, and then start figuring out how do we maintain the quality of the change, given that.
They could
Board
pay-
Member McClellan?
I just wanted to thank you for this data and for the detailed charts that came with it. I really appreciate being able to see which schools are served by which management partners and which districts are served by which management partners, all on one sheet. And I'm hoping that as we go forward and get those results, that maybe we'll also see some additional columns that reflect how well did these partners do. And then if there's a reason why a partner has a more challenging task at hand, for example, if one of these partners tends to specialize in schools with a high percentage of transient population and English language learners and high poverty more than the others by comparison, that might skew their data, and it would then be helpful to have some kind of a note as to why one might be an outlier if they are an outlier. But where you have in the overhead presentation, well, that's an antiquated term, isn't it? Where you have on the PowerPoint, on I think page 9, you've listed all of the partners and how many clients they're serving. That'll be so interesting for us to see the relative rates of success of the various different partners. But then if there's a reason why one is lower performing, that comes with a good explanation because they're serving a more challenged population, for example, that would be of interest as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Board Member Flores?
Oh, I thought the mobility issue was more, once that the leadership people got the training, that they would move on. And I have a solution for that, and that is, if they move on, just collect the money. I mean, just take the money back that was given to them for the training. I mean, or we could say they should be there for X number of years. I mean, this happens all the time.
Yes, we know that.
So we could add, you must stay here.
We don't personally
Or-
give that money to them, though.
Well, for the grant money, but they did take advantage of it, and it does cost money to train.
Agreed.
So there could be something in there, yes, that they serve so many years.
Let's
And
look at the
then-
data and see if that's called for.
Yeah, okay, well, we're
Board Member
talking
Goff?
about trade.
Another chart clarifier question, just quickly. The 3 columns, the year 1 final award, year 2, year 3. I don't know whether it's just the way that the graphics played out, but on my copy, year 1 is kind of highlighted at the top. Is that intentional or reason for it? If not, we go on. But the 1, 2, 3 continual there, does that mean, is this considered year 1?
Yes.
So for year 2 and or 3, I'm looking specifically at Pueblo 60, which also will raise another question for me. So they're looking at that amount of grant money. So they know, they can predict, they've got this for 3 years. Same with a lot of other schools or districts. I just wonder how, if not now, then maybe at some point in the future, or as the next 4 years play out, you know, in these two districts, if this, we need to put this in the follow that mix as well, and that maybe for future, if needed, all of that be considered at the front about, not only from the purely practical resource available angle, but as a strategy or a tool for the whole plan. You know, this is something that should definitely be included in that kind of planning.
Absolutely.
But mostly, I'm thinking about the money, so that, you know, anybody looking at this would see, my goodness sakes, Pueblo 60 has a lot of money over the next 3 years, and how is that going to factor into or impact the plan, the work, and the partnership with whomever it ends up to be. It's just thinking ahead.
Yeah.
Sort of.
I have a question. I don't remember which, 1, 2, I think it's page 4. The 79 schools which are state only, did we cover all the requests for those 79?
Yes. So to build a little bit on the continuation, so these continuation awards are our forecast, and we did that so that we could fund everyone who applied. This year, we wanted to serve across the demand and moved some of the requests from this year to next year. They'll have to apply for continuation funds, and they will need to demonstrate that continuation award. To your point, it's not a check for all 3 years right now, but so that was our intention, so that we could serve everyone who applied and not and be able to serve a wider variety of schools.
So what you don't have room for are any newbies?
We'll have a small amount of room for newbies,
Very small.
a smaller amount of room for newbies if the decision item doesn't pass.
Okay, right, thank you. Any other questions? So there's a motion on the floor to support to agree to the grant list. Call the roll, please.
Board Member Durham,
No.
Board Member Flores,
Yes.
Board Member Goff,
Yes.
Board Member McClellan,
Yes.
Board Member Rankin,
No.
Board Member Sheffel,
No.
Board Member Schroeder.
Yes. What's going on?
That's 4 yeses to 3 nos.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, staff. State Board will now go into executive session. After our executive session, we will then go and take a lunch recess. We will be returning at 10 minutes to 1. Ms. Van Pelt, would you please announce executive session?
An executive session has been noticed for today's State Board meeting in conformance with 24-6, 402, 3A CRS to receive legal advice on specific legal questions pursuant to 24-6, 402, 3A2 CRS, and matters required to be kept confidential by federal law or rules or state statutes pursuant to 24-6, 402, 3A3 CRS.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to go into exec session? So moved. Thank you. And second, somewhere there.
I'm sorry to disturb you.
What was that all about?